If you're here, we are talking about our intersecting identities in Christ. And to me, that whole phrase involves the construction of identity through several different kind of like methodologies, right? So, like we said, nobody goes through this world as a single issue person because nobody lives single issue lives. And in the same way, we're all deeply influenced. You know, like we talk about being white, we talk about being brown, black, Asian, whatever. However, like my experience as an Asian American was deeply affected from growing up in the Midwest, which is very different from Asian Americans who grew up in California. So even within these things, like I oftentimes find myself when I hang out with white people, I get along with Midwestern white people better than I do like New York white people, which is because I feel comfortable in the Midwest in a lot of ways. So none of these things are absolutes, but yeah, that's just a little example. This is my bio. It doesn't matter. It's just there because people tell you put bios and stuff, but I do a lot of artsy kind of things. I'm a freelancer, so I do video production, I do audio production. I have a feature-length documentary called Huandao, which I bike Taiwan, the island of Taiwan, and it's a travel film, so you like eat cool food, go see sites, but also an exploration of identity, which as you can see is a theme in a lot of my work. And I do management as well as like audio engineering, I'm like running all the time at this conference. And then I'm moving into this work too of theology and writing and wanting to talk more about how these things are united together in one. So we're going to talk about use some sociological concepts, theological ones, philosophical ones, as well as some things I learned in business school. So I'm kind of a mishmash of a person, as you can tell. I have a lot of interests, like pumpkin spice lattes and, finance and like all these other things in the world. I think of myself mostly as a person who's an enthusiast, who's like driven by a natural curiosity of like, how does everything in the world work? And then how does that make me work, right? Because we are all products of like the world that we've come up in. So yeah, that's me. I'm Taiwanese American, as I said on there. So we're gonna play this game. Startup. So who here has ever played a game called Sorts and Mingles? Okay, we got one person who's a maybe. So, all right. Let's not erase ourselves. Okay. Okay. Let's go.
Cues.
You can be other if you want. You don't have to.
Is this the queer end of the Kinsey scale?
Yeah. It's like we're just kind of like all around.
You can choose. We were
on the guy's gaze.
All right. You can sit down if you would like. You can stand, do whatever you're comfortable with. We're going to have our discussion about this exercise, this little game we played.
Wow, that was weird.
So the first question, you can kind of think about it as you find your place. What did you notice during this exercise about yourself and about other people?
It's easier to mingle than sort, I think.
Hard to be clear cut definition.
I didn't want anyone to be excluded. I was concerned that each person found a place, and if there was a person on their own, I wanted to make sure that they knew that we supported them.
There's a lot of ambiguity, I think, for many of us, whether it be race, sexuality, or gender, where like there's not a clean-cut category or a way of defining certain aspects of our identities.
How did you make decisions about how you would place yourself? And, like obviously like crinkle or fold is kind of like more, it's less high stakes.
Very concrete.
But like the last three, race, gender, sexuality, like.
You're kind of asking other people too. Okay, if you're putting yourself there, then maybe I know where to put myself.
Did you experience any tension or notice any in other people during the process?
I feel the tension whether I feel like if I'm in a potentially majority group, like the white one, like that doesn't necessarily feel good, like come over and hang out with like the group with a bunch of people, but then it also, like you probably don't want to be the one that's like by yourself somewhere or like doesn't fit in the binary or like whatever. So it's kind of like wherever you go, it doesn't feel very good. I think it's kind of universally carries tension to me.
You and then you and then you. Okay.
Personally, there's a tension in the ambiguity that Kevin mentioned, like not really knowing, do I belong here, or am I kind of on the outskirts this time?
I'm not really in here, but in general, like I have the fear, will I be validated as what who I say I am?
This is a pretty safe space, so like I feel like more safe than a lot of places I've been in my life. So if I put myself in a group, I don't think that they would question that I was there. But I think I actually did this exercise at my LGBTQ group in college, and I experienced a lot of that when I did it, of like, well, if I go in this group, will they accept me? Will the other people in this group accept me as one of them? Yeah.
I actually found the end ones much easier than any of the other ones.
the line ones, just
the
ones at the end.
The
yes.
sexuality, gender, and race. Those are things that I've thought about enough that I'm pretty sure, about, that there's a certain amount of anxiety of, who else is willing to get into this boat with me. But in my own mind, I was very clear about it. It's been a long time since I really thought about my eye color, or about what my favorite holiday was. I mean, these are things that I wasn't sure that I knew what my answer was to it internally, but the other things I did.
Any other thoughts?
Well, I felt kind of singled out when you asked. I don't know if it was what is it, sexual preference or?
I said sexuality.
Because I like transgendered women, and like I go to this clinic in Chicago, Howard Brown, and they ask your sexuality and put other, so I feel like I'm almost a little bit out of it with things.
Do you ever like with me personally? I got out of a very bad marriage after 21 years, and that was 5 years ago. And ever since that, I've had no desire to be sexually active, And when the few people I do tell that, usually the response is, "Well, what's wrong with you?" Or "Don't worry, God's going to bring the right woman into your life." But it's like I'm at my happiest when I'm in platonic relationships with other people, and I mean, in 5 years. I mean, maybe it's a rarity or not. I just don't have that need to be in a sexual relationship, and maybe that's is that asexual or what would they call that? Classify that as non-sexual? Or?
I think that members of the asexual, they sometimes use the abbreviation ACE community. A lot of people feel that way. I'm not ACE personally. I have some friends who are what they refer to as gray ACE, because within the asexual community, there's a spectrum. And so, I do think that those are a lot of the things that I've heard come out of that community. But I can't decide for you if you belong there. So.
But I don't think it's as unusual as you think it is.
Yeah, it's a lot more common.
Yes.
It's just something a lot of people won't talk about. It's like I said, usually if you do tell somebody that, like
that is the response.
It's well, what's wrong with you? You got some kind of trauma or ADD or
people might think you're gay and in the closet.
Yeah, I've had that one too. They say, well, maybe you're gay, you just don't realize it. It's like, well, no, I mean, I'm attracted to women. It's just I don't have that desire to be in a sexual relationship. I just like being friends.
Yeah.
It's okay.
Yeah. Good.
And does knowing that has a name, how does it make you feel? That there are other people that identify that?
It makes me feel kind of a great sense of relief, honestly, because there's so many other guys I see that's all that's on their mind. Even family guys that and I'll ask them, why do you do this to your wife? you married this woman for a reason, and yet all you're doing is looking around to see who else you can score with. And I don't know, not having that kind of desire or burden or whatever you might call that, for me, it's a great relief. I don't have that, and I'm a happier person being just in platonic friendships.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. Really appreciate it. So now you're all settled down. We're gonna get into the brain blast part of this workshop. We're not gonna be talking about our favorite holiday seasons or whether we crinkle or fold our toilet paper. I'm gonna try and leave that behind. I just think it's really funny. So this identity frameworks. So in this section, we're going to talk about essence versus existence as independent versus interdependent. Two separate kind of solar systems of thought on identity. So essence versus existence. Anyone know what exactly this is?
The thinker.
Yeah.
I don't know who did it though.
And we have this. For you created my inmost being. You knit me together in my mother's womb. I praise you because I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Your works are wonderful. I know that full well. Psalm 139:13-14. For most of history, people have lived in the same place. Most people never left within 50 miles of where they were born. Their professions were that of which their parents were. You know, all the people named Smith, it was because family, blacksmith, called Smiths. Your son was Smith, they was Smith, all Smiths, right? My grandfather in China, he was in a family of silk makers. I don't know anything about silk making, but apparently that's what his family did for generations and generations. And, see mariners, sea people, cobblers, carpenters, right? People pretty much did what their parents did, and that passed it down. Didn't really matter what you wanted to do. And people didn't have choices, the same way we have choices now. They didn't meet a lot of people who were different from them. Outside of their villages, they didn't talk to a lot of people who spoke different languages than them. And their profession was that of which their families was. They married oftentimes mostly by arranged marriages. People didn't choose who they married. And their choices didn't make them who they were because that wasn't an option. Right? Today, all of especially our society is who do I want to choose to be? Or that the choices you make you, right? That's kind of the way we think about it. But for most of human existence, choices have not defined who you are because you didn't have choices. So this is part of the existential crisis that we all have. I mean, I think I saw this on Twitter or Tumblr, and it said, what's hard about being an adult is not necessarily, what profession I'm going to make, what college am I going to go to, what city am I going to move to, but ultimately do I buy this brand of oatmeal or do I buy this brand of oatmeal? But then there's also Irish cut, but there's also steel cut, and do I buy it in bulk or do I buy individual packets? And it's all these tiny little decisions built up day after day. Every day you have to make 1,000 tiny decisions, and you're why my mom used to just pick out my outfits for me? And this has been it's an arc, right? It started out maybe you made a few decisions here and there, and as time has gone on, we have more and more choices than ever, and it's very overwhelming, and it's definitely a huge part of our modern society. This kind of relates to a journey of Western philosophical thought, which is in conjunction with theology, history, society, education, all these sorts of things. So we're going to kind of talk a little bit about that. I wanted to root you in the fact that these might feel lofty, abstract ideas, but they're deeply formative to the everyday lives we live. Why does it matter so much what oatmeal I eat? This is Jean-Paul Sartre. Man is nothing else but what he makes of himself. So that verse that we read before, you knit me in my mother's womb, you knew me. That is creation. That is God made me who I am, formed me. That's the more traditional, it's not that simple, but that's the traditional view. You are who you are because God made you who you are. right? In existentialism, which is like you create meaning. Are you clay molded or are you clay that is shaped? Were you created to be something or do you have to make yourself into something? And so the seeds for existentialism were kind of like in the 19th century, but it really came to life in the 20th century, mostly because so Nietzsche famously said, God is dead, right? And that, seems a little pompous of Nietzsche. I often think that. And maybe he thought that he killed God. I obviously don't think that Nietzsche killed God, but he had a point. He had a point that their society was coming to a point where they could fathom a world where God did not exist. And, the creationist people will tell you that it was because of Darwinism that enabled people to do that. I'm not sure I firmly agree with that. It's a very pointed, specific way of looking at the world. But really what erupted, Nietzsche was saying this stuff in the 19th century, but what kind of erupted it was World War I and World War II. You have the technology, the Industrial Revolution, creating mass-produced weapons, chemical weapons, tanks. People used to fight each other on their feet and on horses. And now we have machine guns, and now we have chemical warfare, and now we have, tanks, right? And we can kill people without ever seeing their faces, which is not something we had before. And so we're kind of, I'm saying we as humanity, was confronted with the horror that things could be way worse than we were thought. And maybe God isn't real if all these really bad things could happen. And so if you don't know who you are because God tells you who you are, then why do you exist? What's your purpose and meaning in life?
Are you asking us?
It's a rhetorical. It's a rhetorical question. Dramatic pause.
You were asking for an opinion or a response.
So the summation of these ideas is that essentialism goes back to this idea of essence, that God made you, that you have this pure form within yourself that is original intention and creation. So intrinsic meaning, right? God decided, I'm gonna make SueAnn, and then formed me, and then here I am. Existentialism comes out of this terror, this angst and frustration of well, maybe we're just here because of because a lot of things collided and it happened. And so, but if God isn't real, why am I here? Am I just part of chaos? And you can take that a couple different ways, right? You can take it to nihilism, which is just then just have pleasure and do whatever you want. So that's people tend to think that existentialism is only nihilism. It isn't. There's a lot of different kinds of existentialism. There's Christian existentialism, which is Kierkegaard and all these other people. There's lots of different ways to interact with it. But a lot of it has to do with this core idea of how do I find meaning? Is it just given to me? Or do I have to create it? So existentialism says things don't have intrinsic meaning, instead it's made. This is if I just said a lot of words, just look at this and hopefully that will make it less scary. L'existence précède l'essence. Jean-Paul Sartre, he is an existential thinker, writer. Existence precedes essence. So the easiest, essence, essence sounds like essential oils. You think of essential oils. I think of spirit. So sometimes I think of I have a Casper the Ghost version of myself, and then God sends that into some clay, right? I guess I'm really Genesis, but whoosh, and then I'm created. But what if there's just a body there and it has no soul, and then I create my own soul within myself? So the most of Western classical thought idea was that the idea of who I am, essence, exists before I exist. But this is the flipping on its head. This is the disruption, right, of these philosophers to the way we think about all these things. So, it boils down to meaning. Do we create it? Are we unable to create it? What if I create the wrong meaning for myself? You know, that's what the contemporary existential angst crisis is. What if what decide to do with my life to make my purpose is ultimately meaningless, and it was all for nothing, and I wasted my life? Kind of like sits in the back of your head when you're like, am I studying the right thing in school? Did I pick the right job? Did I marry the right person? What if it was all nothing? What if it's all meaningless? What we see come out of this stew pot of existential angst is this concept of the existential hero. So, little SueAnn, 16 years old, modern thought and literature, Northville High School, honors English. We read The Trial by Kafka, we read The Plague by Albert Camus, who are existential writers. And I memorized all the things my teacher explained to me about what existentialism meant, but I didn't really get it until 4 years later. But this is one thing I vaguely remembered, and then it started to make sense once I got older, which was an existential hero. So it's like the hero used to be like the purpose, like a person is imbued with purpose. People familiar with Harry Potter? Mm. Okay, so Harry Potter is a prophecy, right? I don't know if it's before he's born, but it's like when he's a baby it's made, and it says he is the chosen one, this kid is the chosen one, and he will destroy Voldemort. And so you can look at it this way, and you're like, well, does Harry have to kill Voldemort because the prophecy says that that's his meaning? Or was Harry born to kill Voldemort, and that's why the prophecy was made? Right? So that's like, am I spending my life looking for meaning, trying to conform to what I'm told who I'm supposed to be, or do I just make my own way? Mm. And so the existential hero throws out ideals and obsession with choosing the right thing or the perfect thing, because there is no perfect thing, there is no right thing, and just does, acts, and commits. Mm-hmm. And there's ways that I think this is highly problematic, and there's ways I think it's extremely powerful. Because I think that while I do believe that God has purpose and intention and meaning for our lives, but I just also think sometimes it's a mystery. And sometimes you don't figure it out until you start doing stuff. Yes. You don't know what's wrong until you do it, and you're like, oh, that doesn't work. Right. It's the Thomas Edison quote, I figured out 1,000 ways not to make a light bulb before I figured out how to make a light bulb that works. And a blank slate versus a creative person with intention and purpose. So, essentialism, essence, defies and implies an ideal, right? If you're familiar with Plato's allegory of the cave, there's this idea of the purest, like essential oils. It's the purest essence of the thing, whereas it's in a plant, then it's not as pure, right? But that assumes that there is a purity standard. That assumes that there's a pure form, right? And it also implies premeditated intention. That there was that someone created something with intention. The easiest way to think about it is yourself. Sometimes you you bought some IKEA furniture, and you're putting it together, and you're like, okay, these screws are in here for a reason. I think they are. Yeah. I seem to have some left over. Or maybe this isn't for this, but maybe I can use this screw in a way that apparently wasn't designed to use, but it's useful to me. Right? These are the kind of the stew pot of the questions of maybe that's not the way that tool was created to be used, but hey, it's still useful in this other place. And I feel like I'm always in this tension of essentialist ideas as well as existential, and it's helpful for me to kind of name that in myself sometimes, because I'm both are limited constructs, right? If you just decide to live yourself off of a pure essentialism, then you'll always be struggling to find what is the purest form of being a woman, and how do I achieve that? I can tell you that's a losing battle. Or masculinity, or whatever it is, right? This idea of the purest thing of that. or the most Asian, the blackest, the whitest, whatever it is, this idea that like there's essence to what it means to be X. And therefore it is usually that concept of essence strikes it up as an ideal to be strived for. So existentialism, right, or existence, the action defined. So like, I'm an Asian person, so then anything I do is Asian, right? Or is it like, I do Asian things because I am Asian? Very broad, like, kind of ideas. We're gonna like zoom in a little bit on some of it. Sometimes, like, well, this is a common example. I'm a Christian, so I do Christian things. An example of that is, I'm a Christian. I read my Bible. I pray. I go to church. Right? Existentialism. I do Christian things, therefore I am a Christian. I read my Bible. I pray. I go to church. Therefore I am a Christian. We've seen both of these in our communities in different ways. In oppressive ways, both of them. I'm a Christian, so I do Christian things. I converted when I was 13. This was my mission. I'm a Christian now, so I want to do Christian things. So what does it mean to do Christian things?
Yeah.
Instagram story this the other day because I found it, but I bought scripture mints. Does anybody know what those are? I used to sell them at Family Christian Bookstore. And like a little Bible verse and all the mints are in the shapes of the ichthus. So you're like, in theory, if you're like, hey, want a mint? And it's like, you start a conversation with somebody and then you can convert. I was a very zealous 13-year-old. And I wanted so bad to do Christian things. So I did the things that people said Christians do, like read their Bible, and I prayed. And I went to church like 4 times a week, right? Wednesday night Christian, right? Existentialism. That's like, y'all heard that one, it's like, going to church doesn't make you a Christian, just like if you're in a car, you're in a garage, that doesn't mean you're a car. I always heard that one. But people push back against this because there's this idea that you are a Christian because you are saved, because you've accepted Jesus into your life. So right now we're in this moment where people are talking a lot about liturgical faith, and there's this, it's kind of going back to this thing that this has, sometimes I don't know if I am a Christian or not, because I don't even know what it means to be a Christian anymore. I'm going to do faith practices that actually help me. So, we talked about how sometimes you don't know something until you do it, and then you figure it out from there. Sometimes you have to try some Christian things on to figure out if that resonates with you to go forward. Next one, essentialism. I am gay, so I do gay things. Does anyone have some examples of this one?
I'm gay, so I watch like Will and Grace and stuff, you know what I'm saying?
Sometimes it's easier to think about it in terms of coming out. So sometimes after you come out, people are like, are you only doing that now because you're gay?
Yeah.
Existentialism. I do gay things, therefore I am gay. That comes up most often in like the gay lifestyle, this phrasing around the gay lifestyle. Like, you're not gay unless you do things that are the gay lifestyle. So you're not gay unless you're having gay sex. That's pretty much what it boiled. Like, if you had to find the ideal of what that nugget is in that existential view of gayness, it would be, you are gay if you have gay sex. So this is the tension that we exist in, because our conversations, they kind of recycle these ideas over and over and over and over. So I find, through my experience, my work in the LGBTQ Christian world, is that most LGBTQ Christians have an essentialist view. God made me this way. So even if I'm celibate, even if I'm not dating, if I am dating, if I'm married, whatever, I'm gay no matter what. And anything I do could be considered the gay lifestyle, because I am a gay person. I think that oftentimes the people we're in conversation with and in tension with are still operating from this existentialist construct that, oh no, but I don't see you as a gay person. You see you as a person, like a person loved by Jesus, somebody in Christ. And it's interesting because existentialism is kind of touted as like the anti-God, because like it comes from this like Nietzsche, God is dead kind of idea, very postmodern. And part of this, the reason why people think this way is that everybody thinks this way without realizing that they're thinking this way. Yeah, what were you gonna say?
Could I ask a question about
Yes.
that? I've read stories and I've read articles about children coming out of the closet as gay or wanting to dress as a different gender or anything. Younger and younger and younger. Do you think, is there an existentialism there? I do gay things, therefore I am gay, for like a 6-year-old boy who comes out of the closet. And does it move into an essentialism then? Like is
As opposed to an existentialism?
as opposed to, say, I was 31 when I came out of the closet.
Mhm.
And so I'm more of an essentialist there, that I am gay, so therefore, but a 6-year-old boy or a 6-year-old girl is not going to.
Right, it's a kind of complex idea, right?
Yeah. So is there a transition, do you think, or is there?
I think that it differs from person to person and in different communities, and you're right by age, because our ways of being able to understand what it means to be gay or a Christian or whatever. Like, when you're a child, how do you explain to somebody that what it means to be a Christian? The easiest way is through, like, demonstrable things. Like, we go to church, we pray, like, blah, blah, things like that. And it's when you get older that, like, you're like, yes and no. Like, those things do and don't make you a Christian. It's all complicated. I think that when you're a child, it's easy to understand things as, like, I do this, therefore I am that, as opposed to sometimes self-conception. I think a lot of these things, like, especially gender and what gayness even is, are constructed in our society. So people are socialized to think that if I act this way, then I must be a boy. If I act this way, I must be a girl. Then we're going to get into gender in the next one. Existentialism and postmodernism is seen as like an ideological threat. Really conservative intellectuals, they really think like anything postmodern is evil. And that's not us. I actually had a conversation with an elder at my church where he said, I refuse to use the word queer because that comes from like a very postmodern perspective and we don't believe those things. I was like, everything is socially constructed, Eric. Everything is a modern construction. Like, okay. Anyway, I actually do get really exhausted by that conversation. But, and it's interesting. So a lot of people say, you're not gay unless you're living a gay lifestyle. And so essentially you're a heterosexual, straight, blessed person, right? So then I don't have to demote you because you don't. If you did gay things, then you would. It's seen as a secondary state instead of a primary state, right? But like think of water. Water as a gas, water as a liquid, and water as ice is all still water. It's in different forms, but it's still ultimately the same thing. And certainly we think that water is its liquid form because that's the form in which we find it the most. But that doesn't make it any less so water when it's a gas or when it's a solid. They think that because the gay rights movement, a lot of that stuff was not rooted in a Christian context, they think of it as a very postmodern existential way of thinking, and therefore they assume that if you're an LGBTQ Christian person that you operate from an existential framework. But I will say that like 95%, probably higher than that. I'm kind of being generous to my margin of error of LGBTQ Christians, but queer Christians I know operate from an essentialist perspective. Like, this is who God has made me. And no matter what I do, I will always be gay or bi or queer or somewhere on that other stuff spectrum, wherever. This is just how it is. Now, there leaves room for fluidity because, like, you would say, like, God made me to be fluid, right? Just like the water, gas, solid situation. But I hope that this is a helpful tool when you have conversations with people that kind of keep falling into the same paradigms of like gay lifestyle, like putting your identity in being gay. It's because they think that because you do gay things, therefore I am gay. As opposed to thinking, this is how I am no matter what I do. Just like no matter what I do, I'm still a child of God, right? All right. I'm a woman, so I do womanly things. I do womanly things, therefore I am a woman. Does anybody have examples of how they've experienced this in their lives?
Fix their bra strap.
Well, I feel like not whenever, but I've experienced times where if I'm getting emotional about something, I'm accused of being emotional because I'm a woman, not because I feel strongly about this topic or whatever.
When I was little, well, actually, when I was born, I was assigned female birth. I identify as a woman, so I'm cisgender, and but I'm not super girly. Never been super girly. But like, this is a classic example. You are a girl, therefore I will dress you in girls' clothes. You're a girl, therefore girly things, right? And I think that this is a question to us about the way we interact with gender and sex specifically, is a lot of people think that, a lot of very conservative people, in the conversations I've had, I think they revert to this existential idea that I do womanly things, therefore I'm a woman. So there's like actually this confusion with cross-dressing and transgender, because identity and like expression is different. And one of my friends was like, trans people, like they're hyper obsessed with gender stereotypes and fulfilling them. Like, I think it was because my friend doesn't have any trans friends and only knew of Caitlyn Jenner. So like Caitlyn Jenner's like high femme, right? Like all of the stuff. So then she would imagine like, well, how come they have to do it like that? You know? And I was like, most of the trans people I've ever met told me that they always knew deep down inside. No matter how they expressed it on the outside, they always knew on the inside. I'm a woman, I'm a man, I'm genderqueer. And no matter what I'm wearing on the outside, I'm like, and I can relate to that because I always felt insecure that I wasn't a real woman because I was a tomboy. And it wasn't until I had a transgender suite mate, like we didn't share the room, but we shared a bathroom, my sophomore year of college, and like they were just starting testosterone at the end of that year and had started presenting, started using he, him pronouns, and also a different name than like the legal name. And so listening to Grayson talk was so interesting because, I, before that, always thought that Grayson was just like a really butch lesbian. And, I'm a tomboy, so I was like, okay, yeah, like I get it. Cut your hair short, combat boots, like I got it, military jackets, cool, yeah. But when I listened to Grayson talk, I realized I've never doubted for a moment that I was a girl or a woman, even though I like to wear men's clothes. So that's different, right? And this is a difference in the conversation, the way we have the conversation, is that, like, again, most of the people I know actually operate from an essentialist perspective. But other Christians think that we're like latching on to the evils of postmodern existentialism. Just like Austin was saying, N.T. Wright accusing transgender people of Gnosticism, when in reality, being transgender is one of the best antidotes to Gnosticism you've ever experienced, right? So this is the paradigm that we're all fighting with, working on, and it manifests in many different ways, right? So there's a lot of fights over whether or not queer Christians should identify as queer Christians. You have same-sex attraction. That's like the existential thing. If you do gay things, then you're gay. Right? As opposed to, no matter if I ever have sex or not, if I ever hold another girl's hand or kiss her, I'm into girls. Even I never get to act on it. That's part of who I am. And I think that's a very important distinction, especially for our side B, celibate brothers, sisters, and non-binary pals, friends, and sis. So this is the fight. This is like the hill they want to die on. I read parts of the national statement, but mostly it was really triggering for me. But I don't need to read it. I know what they believe. I lived with those people. I don't need to read it. But that's what it was about. They hated that we call ourselves gay Christians. That's what they hate the most. They hate it so much because it's like fundamentally unable to be gay and to be a Christian. And we're like, dude, you got you're actually pushing an existential view of the world. I operate from an essentialist perspective. God made me this way. You're saying that I make my own meaning. No, I'm saying God has made me as I am, right?
Okay. That's the soundbite right
The other way I mentioned this earlier, performing race. If you've done a lot of racial justice work, if you're a person of color, you feel this racial tests. Are you black enough for the black kids? You Asian enough for the Asian kids? You brown enough for the brown kids? Do you speak, like sometimes, if you don't speak the language, you feel like, well, I'm not a real Latinx person. I don't speak Spanish, I'm not a real Latinx person. Or I don't speak Chinese, am I really Asian? Or like Chinese, or whatever your thing is. And that has to do with this idea of existential identity. Instead of an essence, that God created something in you. And that comes out in really, truly angsty ways. And I think that the only cure for it that I've ever had was to just know that, like, I have peace in God as I am, as I've been created and made. Like, my version of queerness, my version of Asianness is enough. And I don't actually need to, like, pass through all these hoops that people have created to tell me what it means to be Asian or to be a woman, to be queer. Like, I tell that story about my gender expression and identity, right? The other issue we see is trans-inclusive feminism. Or trans-exclusive feminism, to be specific. And the essentialist existential argument has a really big divide in women and gender studies communities, where people say, like, so there's the idea, like, you're not born a woman, you become a woman. Right? Whereas, like, some feminist groups are like, you're female, therefore, you one of us. And if you're not female, and you don't have these parts, then you can't. So we saw some of the tension in that during, like, the Women's March with the pussy hats. I don't know if anyone was around or in those community conversations. People were saying not all women have vaginas. However, most of the, like, mainstream white feminist world that's not trans-inclusive thing says, well, you're not, they operate from this very strict definition of vagina equals woman. Right, so this is where we see this in this world. We see it very obviously in bi erasure. Right, like, I hear so many bi friends tell me, well, if I'm with someone of if I'm bi plus. So if I'm with a woman, then I'm lesbian. If I'm with a man, then I'm straight. Right? That is an existential view of identity. That I'm only what I do. I was sitting at an LGBTQ conference in a bi, pan-fluid, queer caucus. And I heard like a dozen bi, pan-fluid people like say that exact same thing. And I said, hey, I'm not having sex with anybody. I haven't kissed anyone. Does that make me ace? Does that make me asexual? And when you put it like that, you're like, yeah, you're not asexual. But if I was with a man, would that make me straight? And if I was with a woman, would that make me a lesbian? So this is the fight. This is the tug that we're having between these ideas.
So I'm thinking about in psychology, the whole nature versus nurture.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
It's a great.
Okay, that's what I'm thinking. So you can have someone who might, if they were given the opportunity, could play a violin, become a virtuoso or virtuosa. If they don't have a violin and never presented one, we wouldn't ever know. And yet, that still could be within their nature to do that. So, yes.
And a lot of it is also practicing.
Indeed.
Because you could never, like, whether or not you had the innate ability to do it, then the second step is, well, if you ever practiced or didn't practice, then you would never actually be able to become.
Nurture it, yes.
Yeah. So you see, like, it's not all nature, it's not all nurture, but they're all very important. And if we continue to only, like, use one frame of reference to explain this bigger story, then we get caught up in, like, these really microcosmic, like, arguments, as opposed to being like, well, wait, like, let's flip the argument on its head. I'm not sleeping with anybody. Does that make me asexual? Like, then people are like, oh, wait, that's a dumb framework to be using to define your bisexuality. So we're going to move on from essence versus existence. We're going to go towards independent versus interdependent, our second framework. This is from an infographic from Yang Liu, who's like, I want to say Taiwanese, maybe Singapore, Chinese diasporic. All right, someone who's Chinese. someone was Chinese who lived in Germany. And she was like, I want to like create graphic art that just like so simply through just these things shows the difference between one culture and the other. So like her captions are in German and Chinese. I don't read German. But that's just, I love that graphic. This is what it means to be me. Independent versus interdependent. All right. So, individualistic cultures, people form identities by differentiating themselves from other people. Collectivist cultures, people form identity through their relationships with families and communities. All right. So, independent versus interdependent concepts of self have, like, how do you know who you are? Right? And when you ask it, it's like, well, you can say, this is how I'm different from other people, and that's how I am, versus like, this is what I'm a part of, and that's who I am. So some examples of countries, mostly Western countries, like Anglo-Saxon, British culture is deeply individualistic, which is, most of these are places they colonized. Collectivist countries, my beloved Taiwan, Nigeria, South Korea. I mean, a lot of times people talk about collectivism, they focus on Asian communities, but it's very prevalent in lots of places all over the world that are not East Asian. Okay, so individualistic cultures rely on independent constructs of self, which means like people would always say things to me like, who you are when you're alone, that's who you really are. When there's no one else around. Okay? Collectivist cultures tend to rely upon interdependent constructs of self. So this is kind of a bad example, but you know, like someone's in a relationship, they break up, they say, I don't know who I am without them. Or like if you get exiled, you're like kicked out of your family, like I don't know who I am if I'm not. Or for me, I don't know who I am if I'm not in my church.
Yeah.
It's not as simple as just like you draw the borderlines of countries, because cultures are much more bigger than that. And also we're talking about the intersections of class, hemisphere, gender, race, ethnicity, all this stuff. So this is a chart I found online. So examples of independent: Western Hemisphere, male gender, white, race, ethnicity, middle class, mainland Protestant religion, not religious, atheists are very individualistic, north, east, west, workplace, business, global region, global north. Interdependent intersections are Eastern Hemisphere, female, not white, working, conservative Protestant, Catholic, Jewish, other, or South Midwest, government, nonprofit workplaces, and the global South. Anything anyone notice?
Majority, minority.
A lot of this has to do with privilege, the way we talk about privilege, right? It's like the things we tend to think of privileged classes are like over here, and the more marginalized people are over here. We're going to talk next about like the relationship between independent and interdependent concepts of self and privilege, right? So oftentimes people of color talk about how you don't like part of your marginalization is that you don't get to be an individual. You have to speak for your whole community. If you're that one black person in your class, everyone looks at you and says, tell us how black people feel. You're like, black people feel a lot of different things. I know what I feel, but I can't say I speak for all black people, versus the opposite of like, you look at a white person and you're like, how can you speak for all white people? And they're like, wait, that's a thing you expect from me to like speak for all white people? No, white people get the benefit of being individuals. I felt this so deeply when I was trying to come out. I did not use the term gay, lesbian, or bisexual. I said, I'm attracted to women. Because words gay, lesbian, bisexual have so many connotations to it, because it's a community that is like a culture within itself. And if I use any of those words, people would think of whatever they think of when they think of gay, lesbian, bisexual, which, you know, conservative pastors, you know, they think of orgies and gay clubs and which lesbians, right? So I was like, oh, I don't want to be associated with those people, so I'm not going to use those words. But you're like, oh, straight people, heterosexual people, you know, those, they're just, people ever say, oh, I don't want to come out as straight because then they'll think I'm just like all those other straight people. You know, like a straight person, they get to be moral. They get to have decisions. They get to, like, there's promiscuous and not promiscuous heterosexual people. But gay people, promiscuity is, like, woven into what people think it means to be gay. So that's part of privilege, and that's part of independence. So when we think of ourselves, I think about my community, who I am and how the world sees me is deeply ingrained into my community. And I can't not care what happens to them because it'll happen to me. Right? Same can be said for these other kind of like intersections we were talking about. So, identity formation and coming of age. So, this is really obvious in the United States. Coming of age means creating an identity separate from that of your family, parents, community. I know a lot of guys with Hebrew tattoos. Do y'all know some people with Hebrew? I know Kenji. Oh, we got one over here. We got one over here. All right. A lot of people my age, a lot of men that I know have Hebrew tattoos. And I found this so fascinating because I have zero desire to get tattoos, that they would all do this. All of them pretty much grew up in more conservative Christian groups, and they are still Christians, very devout Christians. However, they did not want to be associated with their parents' Christianity. No, these guys drink craft beer, and they wear V-necks. And I'm not uptight like my parents. I'm cool. See, I got a tattoo, and my parents hate tattoos. Therefore, I'm not like them. I'm not like them. I'm coming of age. I'm going to show you. I'm not like you, but I'm still a Christian. I want you to see me as a Christian. So I'm going to get a Bible verse.
Hallelujah.
Right? So that to me is an example of like how young men, young Christian men, want to be seen as different and individual and separate, yet they still want to be a part of something. So
Different like everyone else.
getting tattooed used to be like, I'm rebelling. And they're like, I'm rebelling, but for Jesus. Collectivists, which like sometimes I think about as male and female, there's always these stereotypes of like men, they have to go off into the woods and like build their own house and hunt and kill a deer. Like we're talking about deer a lot lately, but that's when you become a man. Like a man leaves his mother and father and then becomes a thing, right? Whereas women tend to be more collectivist and have community with other women, right? And this is really obvious in like a collectivist coming of age where, you know, sometimes you ask yourself, like, when did you know you were a man? When did you know you were a woman? When did you know you were grown up? So when I got my period, my mom was like, oh my gosh, you're like a woman. And I was like, I don't think that makes me for some reason, like, I don't feel like I just became a woman. And even when I look back at that moment when I was 12, I don't see that as like a defining moment of womanhood. I knew that I was a woman when I started to be the person who served the food instead of the person being served. Especially in my culture, right? Like, you know, that's when you're a child, they make your plate for you. When you're a grown up, you make the plate for the child, right? So that's what's really obvious for me. And I think that, you know, if we were to look at Chinese culture, which is my culture specifically, we would see that it's a deeply collectivist culture. However, there's still a way that like the experience that men have in Chinese culture versus experience that women have in Chinese culture are different in terms of like, how do I know who I am now? Right? So this is how like, it's like, I'd be like, well, Chinese culture is collectivist. But I'm like, but the way a man experiences is different than the way a woman experiences. And now we have a 3-dimensional solar system instead of a binary sort, right? Of how individual versus collective, woman, man, sexuality, class, all these things. And class is important too because unions are a deeply important part of the history of the working class. And that's like a place where you see collectivist culture is unions, right? Because you don't have power unless you band together. And that's why collectivist groups are usually marginalized, because unless they support each other, they won't get anywhere. So I'm not trying to make a deeply value judgment about that, like an interdependent construct of self is way better than an independent construct of self. I think they're both helpful. I think it's important to know that who you are is shaped by what communities you put yourself a part of and who you are, but also to know that you aren't only that, because like, who am I when I don't have a church I can go to anymore? I'm still a Christian. And I wouldn't have that if I thought only being a Christian was being a part of a church. right? But also, being in the church by myself, or reading my Bible by myself doesn't feel like church. So, Christianity is both and. It's both independent and interdependent. This concept of individual salvation is very Protestant, very evangelical. It's very different from a lot of different branches of Christianity. However, I will say that especially the Protestant Reformation had a really big part of that. The idea that individual personal piety was important and obedience, as well as personal scripture study, right? This idea of a personal relationship with God, very Protestant, very evangelical. That's so independent, right? Your relationship with God it's independent. Whereas if you look at some Orthodox church traditions, you are a Christian because your family's a Christian and you were baptized and you were born into it. I see a lot of value in both. I used to be a Baptist, basically, and, I had to believe, I converted, so I had a believer's baptism. Doesn't matter one way or the other. But I eventually became a part of a Reformed, Presbyterian community, and then it was oh, now I understand infant baptism. And why would I want to do that? Because I wanted my child to know you belong to this, you belong to us even if you choose to ever leave us. We will always, like Jarrell said, be united in our baptism. That's something really important to that, in that you can't lose it, even if you want to. That's the security that, you're always a child of God, even if you don't act like one. We all need that, right? All right, so this, I rebel, therefore I exist. This is what we're gonna break this one down. Albert Camus. What is this, an essentialist perspective, or?
Existential.
Yeah, Albert Camus is an existentialist. That was an easy soft book. That was a soft toss. All right, independent versus independent. Is this?
Independent.
All right. So we've been breaking down the binary in a lot of ways. Everyone was so aware of that tension when we were doing sorts earlier. Like race. The Where Society always talks about race as a black-white binary, and in most places of the world, they probably be all right, white people over to black people here, and all the Asians be I don't know where I belong. And they usually put themselves close to the white people, but in front of the brown people. But that's what happens when you rely on these binaries. As we said, multiple intersections, but also we said it's hard. It's hard to you have to call out to other people. You have to decide for yourself, oh, how do I identify and who else do I think is a part of my community? Mingling takes a lot more work, I think. Whereas it's oh, it's a binary, I just put myself somewhere on a line. As opposed to oh, I need to be in conversation with a lot more people about whether or not we are the same thing, or if we want to be together, even if we are different. And so that work is helpful. And we've talked about some binaries, right? Individualism, collectivism, existentialism. And we revert to Western frameworks because that's kind of the way that Western logic works. I'm going to kind of introduce a couple ideas that will help us realize that the way we experience things here in America are not the way that cultures interpret everything around the world. Normativity of any type is reliant on privilege. How do we decide what's normal? Who gets to decide what is normal? Whoever's in power, right? I had that conversation on Twitter with a side B celibate friend of mine who's gay, and he's who gets to decide? Who gets to decide whether or not you are a Christian or not? Because that was one thing in the national statement talked about. And I said, whoever's in power, they get to decide what it means to be a Christian and if you are one or not. Normativity correlates with the construct of individuality. So individualism, it actually operates from the framework that there is something that's normal, and therefore I must be different from the normal. And I really experienced this when I lived in Taiwan for a while, because all the ways I understood subculture, people, their motivations, they didn't make any sense. All my friends are worried about finding a job that has meaning so that their life can have meaning. And most of my friends my age in Taiwan were I just gotta find a good job because I need to help support my family. Whoa, totally different ways of thinking about what I'm gonna work. And I was oh man, I'm so rooted in that my Western way of thinking. And I looked down upon them because I thought, well, I'm so enlightened. I do what I do because I'm passionate about it. And I was like, but taking care of your family matters when they're relying on you. And who's going to be there for you? Your job might not always be there for you, but in theory, your family will always be there for you. At least in Asian culture, that's what they try and tell you. Unless you do something so bad, they want to shame you out. Binaries often exist to uphold privilege and power. This is the idea that's normative in our society. Classical liberalism, freedom of the individual. So classical liberalism is like the founding fathers of the United States, Adam Smith, these guys. So there's this idea that political philosophy that like freedom, individuals have freedom. However, if we have anarchy, then like nobody really has freedom. So we have to limit freedoms to a certain point so that we can max it. Like we can like get the balance between freedom and constraint, and therefore maximum freedom. Right, like you probably have heard some of these things floating around in political rhetoric. It's very prevalent in conservative libertarian communities. They're all about like finding that sweet spot of like, we want there to be post offices so that I can send messages, but I don't want there to be healthcare so that everyone can get cared for, right? Because there's this idea of limiting personal freedom for the individual. Right? Well, it's like, well, I want the freedom to send my post anywhere I want. And it's like, well, I want the convenience of putting a letter in the mail knowing it'll show up. So that's what America's built on. And that's so much of what modern governance, modern morality, philosophy is based on. So these are not like the same thing, but they're connected. Nietzsche had what he called slave-master morality. And so master morality creates its own values and stands beyond these socially constructed good and evil. Slave morality values kindness, humility, and sympathy, and the master transcends the mediocrity of the common person. You can tell he's a kind of racist, misogynist dude. Übermensch, which is the German word for Superman, is the basis for Hitler's idea of the Aryan race, to rise above, to go beyond the common convention of what good and evil is, to ultimately forge your own essence forward, to decide what is truly good for you. What happens when you leave behind kindness, humility, and sympathy, right? And this is the problem, is that if you keep taking this kind of like, you're on this road, you'll just keep going. And I'm not saying it's a slippery slope that ends in genocide, but oftentimes it has been. If we look at the United States as an example, whose freedom was more important? Was the freedom of enslaved African people? That was the sacrifice that was necessary for all those white men to have the freedom they wanted, to make lots of money and pay no labor. Right? And so that's the hypocrisy of liberalism, is that it always says, well, we have to limit certain freedoms so that everyone can be the most free. But the people who are always going to not be the recipient, they're going to bear the brunt of the oppression so that everyone else can be free. That is in complete contradiction with my personal philosophy, which I got here from some Aboriginal activists from Queensland in 1970. This is a kind of like popular quote in activist circles. If you have come here to help me, you are wasting your time. But if you've come because your liberation is bound up with mine, then let us work together. This is an inherently different way of thinking about freedom. Instead of like, well, we have this much freedom and we have a bubble, and if we get this close, then my freedom isn't set. Instead of, if we all come together, that's the only way we can be free. Individualism versus collectivism, in some ways. More so independent. Like, I cannot be independently free unless we are interdependently free. So,
can you say it again, please?
We cannot be independently free if we are not interdependently free. And this is how we justify mass murder, genocide, bribery, illegal immigration, these sorts of things. They're different, right? Like, well, illegal immigration, it oppresses citizens, right? So we have to privilege citizens' freedoms over other people's freedoms, as opposed to believing that if we come together and actually care about each other, that we could have a world where someone doesn't have to hold someone else up in order for someone to be. So I actually realized the term get ahead is like, I don't like it, because it implies that like, you're like, well, why can't black people get ahead? It was in a podcast I was listening to, and I thought, get ahead. That assumes there's a bunch of people behind you. someone has to be behind you in order for you to get ahead. And that's why white people are scared, because they think that black people want to do to white people what white people do to black people. So we're here for collective liberation. And this comes out in a different way of a codified versus a relational ethic. I'm also like running out of time because I overestimated how much information I have. But I'll try and wrap this up quickly. So codified means like, this is the rules. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, like, you know, if any of you have ever studied law, you're like, section 1A, B, subparagraph C, versus a relational ethic. So one idea is like, I know what's right because the law says this, versus I know what's right because, like, I experience morality through how it relates to myself and other people and God. So I love the 10 Commandments as an example because people are like, well, this is a law and it's code, just like Leviticus. It's just a code, we have to do this. However, if you read the 10 Commandments, so that people can say it's a codified morality, right? If you read the 10 Commandments, it says, I am the Lord God who brought you out of Israel. I made you. I'm your creator and I love you. That is the basis of a relational ethic. This is a reciprocal relationship. You don't just do this because it's right and wrong. You do this because we are in relationship with each other. And they like to say, before you break any of the other 9 commandments, you always break the first one. Right? And that's why we get love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, and mind, and love your neighbor as yourself. That's why you can sum it up all in that one, right? So there's some cultural dimensions I'm just going to try and zoom through. Power distance is an extent which less powerful members of organizations and institutions accept and expect the power is distributed unequally. This goes back to this idea of liberalism, that everyone is equal, and therefore, like, we're going to just act as if we're in a society where everyone is equal. Whereas, like, in Asian culture, you kind of like, at least in Chinese culture, I know this is true in Korean and as well, you refer to family members by their, like, uncle, aunt, like, by status. And you always know who's gonna eat before you, right? Like, there's a very deep sense of hierarchy, but that also comes with responsibility. So in America, we're like, everyone's equal, but that means, and therefore we're just gonna go for it. That means whoever pushes themselves to the front of the line gets to eat first. Mm-hmm. Whereas in Chinese culture, there's an expectation that an older, more powerful, a better off, a richer person is supposed to take care of somebody who doesn't make as much money as them, who is younger. So like if I'm out to dinner with a friend and they are older, they make more money than me, they will pay for me, usually. They'll fight me. I have to fight them, but we don't even get into that. Uncertainty avoidance is the idea that a society tolerates uncertainty and ambiguity. America, very low on uncertainty tolerance. So that's why we feel the need to create labels, boxes, whatever people like to say, and to not like wrestle with this idea that, well, the law, the codified law says this is right and this is wrong, versus this idea of like, well, the ethical ambiguity of relational ethics. It's like, am I hurting someone? Am I hurting myself? Am I hurting my society? Am I hurting God? That's not as easy as saying this is right or this is wrong in a codified ethic. So these are ways that we assume everybody thinks this way, but these are all part of what's called Hofstede's cultural dimensions, which I learned about in business school. You can look them up. They're really interesting to read about. I would recommend it. Individualism, collectivism is one of their cultural dimensions. Masculinity, femininity, power, distance, uncertainty, avoidance. These are all parts of it. I was going to have this break down some of the binaries in our society. You can say if you want, if you leave. I will try and do this in like 5 minutes. So the example of the binary, black or white, one drop rule. Okay. One drop rule is that if you have one drop of blood from an African person, then you are a black person. And so why does that exist? Why does that binary, such a strict binary, you're either black or you're white, there's no mixed race people, only black or white. It exists so that they can enslave more people, right? Because otherwise all these children who are the products of rape from plantation owners, they would be considered inheritors. But no, we need more people at the bottom. So that's like an example of how, as we said, a lot of these binaries are created to perpetuate privilege and power. And so also there's an uncertainty avoidance. We had a great group of mixed race people here, and it's weird to live in that uncertainty of being mixed race. You don't know exactly who you are. But if you're in a culture that has more tolerance for that, then there's more space. We have not a lot of tolerance for uncertainty in our society. And colorblindness. So that has to do with power distance, right? We were talking about how people want to believe everybody's the same because they're all equal. They have this ideal that everyone's equal. But it makes them unable to then see how people are different and therefore how they suffer because they are different. And I think this is a really big barrier that we have to discussions. Like, I don't want somebody to say to me, oh, I don't see a queer person when I see you. I think of you as a person in Jesus. And I was like, or as like a sister in Christ. And I'm like, part of being a sister in Christ is that I'm queer and that I'm oppressed in the church. And the only thing that benefits you by the only person who benefits by erasing me is you. It absolves you of responsibility to bridge the power difference. And that's the problem, is people are so uncomfortable with the fact that some people have more, some people have less, that keeps them from doing anything. I know I just threw a lot at you, but I hope you came away with some good stuff. Find me, talk to me. I would love to hear your thoughts and discuss with you about breaking down some of these binaries, ways you experience erasure because of that. And I have some resources for extra readings from some of the things I've referenced. So East Meets West, it's really cute to look at. Gert Hassed's Cultural Dimensions. This is a book I actually haven't read, but I bought because I was like, that's what my workshop is about. Queering the color line of race and the invention of homosexuality. It argues that like the one-drop rule, black-white binary, like is also the way that they invented the concept of homosexuality. Someone's gay if they've ever had one feeling for someone of the same gender as them. Right? Like, that's so weird. We don't think of the other way sometimes. Like, if any queer person has ever had one thought about someone who's a different gender than them, then they must be straight. It's not a two-way street. Black, white, binary, gay, straight, binary. There's a lot of similarities in that. So I'm recommending to you, even though I haven't read it. Warning, sign. And then Cultural Models of Shame and Guilt, which is a great paper that talks about independent versus interdependent concepts of self in relating to guilt-based and shame-based cultures, and also codified versus like the relational ethics. It's only like a 10-page paper, but it took me like hours to sort through because it's really dense, but it's been very helpful for my own personal development as an Asian American. So that's what I got. Thank you so much.